Well, good morning. I'm really pleased to be here. In my introductions, when Richard says, you know, you were senior editor of the Cooperative Education Journal, well, the other senior editor was Richard. When I talk about the Fulbright, I was sponsored by Richard. So Richard and I go way, way back doing research on the transition into college and what are the antecedents that students need to be very successful. But since we started that work 15, 20 years ago, things have changed very, very fast, particularly in the U.S. In response not only to huge technological changes, but to the recession of 2008 that was particularly significant. And so what I'm going to talk about today is not all you hear about why there's deficits in the college students for preparing and the lack of skills and all these things. Most of you have read about that, and if not, I can certainly direct you to that. What I'm going to talk about is how the economy has reshaped itself, and it demands a new kind of professional, a new type of person trained by the universities. And I'm going to use Michigan State's response as a way to start, and then I'm going to talk about the ending first. And then what I'm going to do is talk about how we got there, and I'm not going to bring in a lot of research or anything. I'm going to usually use just brief stories to talk about that. And then when I get to the end, it will be about how we're responding and how colleges and universities are responding in the U.S. That's what I'm familiar with. But this is a global issue, and all the universities are going to have to respond because I said this is moving very, very quickly. So to start, I'm going to start with a video. This is a video from Michigan State as it set out two years ago our space, technology, and learning basic strategies to deal with what we're going to call the T-shaped student. And I'm going to talk a lot about that today. But this is you can see where we're at and some of the things that are coming together to change undergraduate education throughout the world, but particularly at Michigan State, which is taken on by our president that we will be a T-shaped university, and it has huge implications. Now, not all of our universities in the world are going to do this, but we're going to feel it in many different ways. So I'm going to start here with this video.
Universities today are really good at building depth, but it's also possibly very easy to get siloed, I'm sure, for students as well as faculty, and not have opportunities to connect.
The education world really is a transition point right now. There's got to be a change. What product am I trying to put out at the end of the day?
So the question becomes, how do you create spaces that inspire and support curricular and instructional change? And then what is it that you want the outcome for students to be?
So we're bringing in about a dozen of our leaders and planners, along with about 25 plus faculty, administration, students from Michigan State. And we're going to talk about and draw and brainstorm, trying to envision the next world.
I want to make a game. I need designers, people who understand story, motion, and sound. I need people from the College of Engineering.
Funding agencies for research want more collaboration across disciplines. They also want to see these different kind of people. The T is a kind of nifty concept.
The vertical part of this T-shaped process is this really deep dive knowledge of what your major is. And then the horizontal band of this is this new thought process that says, I want a team player. I want a broad thinker.
Benefit for MSU is really to advance our ability to create innovative learning spaces for our students.
What does a bioscientist need to be able to explore when I've got a mathematician sitting there next to him, and then maybe a law student? What is that environment totally going to look like? What does it need to be?
Where's the glue that holds this place together? Where would they? Geographically or functionally?
There's all this movement. It's all over. It's wherever students happen to be and take us.
But the notion of rethinking the existing buildings on campus, as well as beginning to imagine new buildings and how they'll begin to change that organization, that's what's coming out of this workshop. That's pretty exciting.
We should try to be creating some central academic corridor, some central focus for the academic part of the university. So we could imagine having a technology commons or technology sandbox where students could get supported.
So we're thinking, well, what kind of places facilitate those interactions? A makerspace, which a makerspace can contain resources that multiple makers, multiple disciplines can make use of.
We need to transition from spaces to places. Space is empty. Places are purposeful, they're full. Here's where player interaction is going to happen.
If we can do it here with the students who come here hungry to get an education, to make change, to be part of this community, if we can figure out how this experience, not A or B, but A and B, the T-shape, if we can figure this out, everybody in the country will look at Michigan State University, and they're already doing it.
Okay, so in this video, it's a setup that what we're looking at is how we're going to change basic delivery of curriculum and why, but to get there, and I'll show you examples at the end, is we have to know why. So I'm going to do a little bit of history here. I'm going to take you just a little bit of history to show you how much things have changed. Now, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, which is Washington, Oregon. This is when I grew up outside my backyard. So this is like going on a walkabout. And graduation up until about 1980, end of 1980s, early 1990s, was simply like going on a walkabout. You come to a gap in the trail, and you have to exert a little effort to get across, but everybody makes it. There's no problems. And it's easy. You notice the other side is nice and flat, just as the left side and right side are flat, so there's nothing challenging here. To get across, you didn't need any work experience. What employers were counting on was faculty like you to really educate content knowledge so you could have bright students that had the content to come into the workplace. Companies took the responsibility at that time to do all the training. Why? Because we were in those jobs back in that period 4 to 6 to 8 years before we made a job change. They taught us, the companies taught young people how to work. They taught them and gave them the skills they needed in addition to their content knowledge to succeed. And in the U.S. during this time period, the major employer of most college students were very large companies, what we call the Fortune 500. And in Michigan, it was the auto industries. We have the largest concentration of auto industry, and they dominated. So when I started the Institute in 1985, General Motors, just General Motors, hired 210 Michigan State graduates a year. Dow Chemical would hire 150 chemists and chemical engineers a year. So we had this pipeline that was very structured and focused. And the faculty, back in those days when I started, I did everything. I taught, I did research, but I also advised students on their career. I also aligned them with business and things. I didn't have a big career service office. I didn't have academic advisors. All that would come later as we tended to silo away. Now, I want to jump ahead to 1990s and what began in the 1990s and what is prevalent today, and that is graduating from college is an extreme sport. There is no guarantee that somebody graduating today can actually get to the other side. In fact, you have to use your imagination here a little bit to understand the dynamics in this picture. The right side, where the young person from college is trying to get to, is moving away from the academy at an accelerating rate, and that's not going to stop. And what's happened in between time is that the right side is actually higher than the left side. So these young people have to jump out and up, because expectations of employers of what young people can do today are so high, and what they need in the workforce is so different than in the 60s through the 80s that it's very challenging. For one, you cannot get across without some type of professional experience. In the U.S. parlance, that's probably an internship, but that's not exclusively what's available. You cannot get across. You can't get enough leverage to jump if you do not have pre-professional work experiences to understand what you're going to do with all that content knowledge that you and I, our faculty, are teaching these young people. Second thing is, and why we have so much pressure from businesses, they do not train and develop anymore. Because they're moving so fast and their return on investments are so low from training and development that they pushed it back on us. Whether we as faculty want to do this or not, we're not going to be given much choice anymore. Because these young people are only in these first positions 1 or 2 years. That movement is very, very rapid. The biggest thing that has changed is the fact that no longer are most of our university graduates hired by Fortune 500 companies. 60% of all our graduates at Michigan State are hired by companies of 500 or fewer employees. Last year, General Motors celebrated when they finally hired 20 people from MSU. Dow Chemical hired 8. And we're still the leading schools in their hiring. They just don't need the numbers. Where do we go? We go to small companies and startups. And that's why there's a big push, as I'm going to talk about, to go to entrepreneurial-based education models, or what we're going to call adaptive innovation teaching strategies. Okay, so we have just a opposite way that students have to transition now. And the expectations of you on us, you and me as faculty, are very, very different. And we really haven't accepted them all yet because we're very, very siloed in our disciplines and we don't often reach out for the interconnections. And that's where I'm going to lead you today on what it's going to look like at the university in the not too distant future if you so choose to engage it that way. So I can skip that. I talked about this. So now I'm going to talk about the new professional. What's happened is you've heard constantly bombarded, whatever your journal, whatever your profession, whatever where you're at in the university, about the constant need to have skills and competencies. And I've been working in this since the 1990s. And stepping back, what we're really asking now is not, there's always going to be a gap because we've asked for an entirely different person to succeed in the workplace than the one that came out of World War II and we designed our curriculum around to deliver. Okay? So there's 2 ways to get to this story. And I is an individual that has deep knowledge in a subject matter. And we want to transform these people into T's, and the message was depth and breadth. And there's a couple strategies to get there. One will follow the entrepreneurial side, and the other is going to track the boundary-spanning, innovator type, and that's going to come out of the skills and competency literature. I'm going to spend a little more time getting to the T on the entrepreneurial side because that's what's on everybody's plate, including Michigan State, and how different schools are going about it in a very general way. But I really want to get and start and talk about the T, so we're going to kind of move a little quickly here. So let's talk about tail number 1 is the entrepreneurial model. Now, okay. So there's some definitional issues here that I want to put on the table. Because when we talk about entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial education, most people say we want to start your own company. That's what we want young people to be able to come in and have an experience that stimulates them to go out and start their own business. And there's a lot of rationale for that. There's those that are cynics about higher education, that it's stultified and it's not very exciting, and so to jazz things up, we're losing really good students who just don't want to sit in our classes anymore. And there's stories about a number of these young people, and I might tell you 1 or 2 of them in a minute. But they don't stay around, so let's do this entrepreneurial type of education. On the economic side, from my point of view, there's us that study labor markets that say, well, we really need entrepreneurial education because we're not generating enough jobs, good jobs, from the sources that we relied on, those large corporate 500 companies, to meet the demand of the number of graduates we're turning out. I mean, they can talk about all the STEM jobs and all the jobs in the world. Unless those companies are actually creating them, we're finding that we're going to have to create these jobs some other way, and we're relying on young people to do it. But there's another definition of what employers are asking for, and that's entrepreneurially minded students. These are students that are aware of the entrepreneurial process, that have had experiences with the entrepreneurial process, and have played in it. So they've played in the sandboxes, they've played in the maker labs. They know how to start with ideas, try to attempt to create something with those, and even if they failed. Then there's another definition. Are they just familiar with the entrepreneurial process? They may or may not play with it. And then what you're now seeing is the addition of the word creativity. And this is particularly coming in the U.S. of entrepreneurial/creative activities, because the entrepreneurial dialogue in the U.S. is all about engineering and computer science. And that leaves out 90% of all the students at Michigan State University. So what happens is, if you look at the creative process as an entrepreneur, you include the arts, the performing arts, the humanities, the social sciences, and you can be broad and inclusive. Okay, so let's look at this. Starting your own business. We have put in place in many universities incubators that are spaces where students and faculty can go and start to create their own business. They can play with their ideas, they can advance their ideas, then they can make pitches to venture capitalists and see if they can get startup money to do this. Probably no country has done this more extensively than Ireland. Ireland did this back starting in the late 1990s because their economy was booming at the time, and they realized that it was all external. There was no Irish industry underneath this, and if the economy turned bad, there was nothing internal to support them, which is actually what happened when 2008 came along. They hadn't gone far enough down this road for their startup companies to absorb the losses that were coming from huge companies. But this is very typical. So they create a lot of places to play, experiment, and fail. So we do it through incubators. But then you have to succeed in this. You have to have a culture, an institutional culture that supports this. Nowhere in the world is the institutional culture more to support startup entrepreneurial activities in Stanford University. This did not come from the faculty down. This came from the students up. Students now go to Stanford to expect to start their own business. It's part of the culture. In fact, Stanford's problem is, how do we get students to complete their degrees at Stanford when, in fact, they come and start these companies and they leave to nurture these companies because they believe they can come back to Stanford anytime, but I might not get another chance to start this company. So you have a young woman that goes on an internship after her sophomore year that figures out how to do blood analysis with a drop of blood, where it used to take, if you go to get your physicals, tubes and tubes of blood. They can do it with now one, and they can run 99% of all blood tests with this one drop of blood. And they're doing this all the time. But you have to have a culture that supports it. So what they put in place at Stanford, the first one, and Stanford faculty fought this, and it only came because it was neutral, it didn't include any majors, was a design center that was funded by the Germans, not anybody in the U.S., because it's so opposed to what their belief and how they taught. But this is where everything now happens at Stanford. This neutral place where anybody can come and meet others, and they begin to create these ideas. So we're kind of duplicating those all over. Location also makes a difference. if in fact you don't have a lot of small business activity surrounding your campus, it's very hard to start this. And that's Michigan State's problem. Because around us were these big, huge Fortune 500 companies that for decades just pummeled small business. We didn't have it. The best thing that ever happened to all the drama in Michigan with the demise of the auto industry was we just became a blossoming ground for small business. We aren't to a tipping point yet, but we're really moving that way that will allow us to be successful in entrepreneurial activities. But you must have a small business mindset around campus. So it's grown up around Stanford, MIT, University of Texas. Now, if you have the right environment, you can move very, very quickly. So the University of Utah in Salt Lake City is on the front of a huge environmental run-up. And so what they've done is they've just cleared off their campus, built a big, huge design center, and they're going to go very, very quickly. So if you have the right kind of stimuluses in your culture, you can move very quickly. But most of us don't, so we have to go somewhere else. And so we go to this entrepreneurial playground, or creativity playground, where we set up maker labs, classes with possible minors. So we have an entrepreneurial class that's highly integrated into practice and things like that, so they can experiment in failure. They do lead to incubators, but it's small. But in doing this, now we have to convince faculty to allow to change their curriculum to allow students to play. Now we're asking me to take a curriculum, economics curriculum that I've taught for a long time, and make it into a transdisciplinary exercise where we can start experimenting. And in some places on our campus, that's going like gangbusters, and others, the walls have been up and are going up higher and higher because faculty don't want to play. What they have to do is really connect to the real world. The final way on this is creativity. Creativity is a way to expand and be more inclusive, the definition. Because everything in the U.S. is focused on STEM. And while we're increasing numbers in STEM, there's some dark sides of STEM. And it has to do with the job market. Engineers are fine. Computer science are fine. In the sciences, it's a different story. And while our physical scientists are okay, our life sciences, we're producing so many more than there are jobs. And so there's a message out there when students go into sciences, picking the biological and health sciences, that there's going to be jobs, and they're not growing that fast. So we have to be able to expand their connections into other things. Likewise, we have to talk about what we're going to do with our arts and performing arts and make their connections back into things like computer-aided design and things like that. Okay, now, the bottom line here is the mindset that we know exists among entrepreneurs. Herbert Simon in AI intelligence was the last thing he did before he passed away, was work with his graduate student on what were the characteristics of an entrepreneurial type person in an AI age. And there's three things that you have to be able to do. You have to know who you are, you have to know what you know, and you have to know who you know. So who am I, what do I know, and who do I know, and how do I connect? I'm going to leave you there because that leads into the T, but I'm going to take you on to tail number 2, which is through career competencies and everything. Now, I could go on for hours about this because most of my work is in this, but I'm going to leave it to one case study, the potato. Now, I know most of us are defined by our culture, but nothing defines Boise State more than the potato. And I was doing a work in Boise recently on this, and we looked at this very, very differently. We used some statistical techniques that are now easy to do through survey design, which were terrible before, called contingent evaluation, because not only did we want to list what was important skill sets, which is like Likert scales for those that are into this kind of stuff. Likert scale has a whole bunch of biases. So we want to try to reduce that. So we went to contingent evaluation, which is worst case, best case, which tells us not only lists from in importance and ranks skills, that competencies in importance, but it also tells us how they relate to each other. So here's the situation. At Boise State, the faculty is interested in change, right? And what they want, give me the silver bullet. I go all the places. Give me the one or two skills that if we surely put in, all our graduates we find that's all we have to worry about. Just give me one or two. Well, the results of this study didn't come out that way. What happened was we find them in bundles. Skills come and competencies come integrated. Skills and competencies come from various sources. So this is, in Boise, happens to be the top set of skills that employers expect students to be able to produce when they come into the workplace. Now, the ones that are highlighted in bold are ones that we directly assume correctly come from you and me as faculty in our academic disciplinary training. All the others can come from anything else a student does during their university experience. All those co-curriculars, all those internships, we have endless number of ways that students get involved. And so the other sector is that skill set bundle number 2 is significantly different since lower than skill bundle number 1, but they come in bundles. Their standard deviations overlap. And again, you can see it is a combination of what we do in the classroom with other sets of experiences, or do we extend our educational pedagogies outward to capture all the things we can do, and are we integrating all these experiences when they come back or as we go along? Because you can't have bundles unless you integrate. Okay, so that brings us, that was just a very fast way to get to this, the T. I'm not sure if many people heard about the T. I've been working with the T for about 15 years with IBM. This is an IBM thing, along with IDEO and some others. The T concept has been around since the early 1990s when it came out of the UK as part of the IT revolution. But it really has caught on since about 2002 to 2004 out of Silicon Valley, and we're talking about T-shaped professionals. Now, other people will talk about depth and breadth in different ways. It is simply a metaphor. So you can find the metaphor that fits you the best given these conditions, and we're seeing variations. But this is just one way to assemble things that you and I do every single day and put it in a cohesive manner. So, why, in fact, do employers pushing this? Why are they so adamant about the skill deficits of students? Well, companies have found that people with different specialization experience find it difficult to talk to each other. So everybody assumes IBM is a company of engineers and computer scientists, which it truly was. But to solve the problems that they deal with today, they found they couldn't do it. They found out that they needed humanists, social scientists, and others to balance off their engineers and computer science. What they found out was computer science and engineers can't talk to anybody else. Okay? And that the humanists and social scientists were a little afraid about engineers because they were so nerdy when it comes to technologies and their algorithms. Okay? Second is to solve the complex challenges that every one of us has to face. We can't do it alone with only one discipline. You need different disciplines, you need different communication standards, you need a huge understanding of cultural awareness, not only for the teams you're on, but where those complex challenges are located. So, we're going to start with building this out, this T. And as we know from Herbert Simon, who you are is very, very important. So the center and core part of this is the me. Now, because I'm not astute and I am not an engineer and I don't know how to program these things so they can make this, I had to put the me in first. I'm going to talk about it last. Okay? So we'll come back to the me. So the first part of the T is the bottom part. It is the depth of knowledge that we acquire in our academic pursuit. So if I'm in accountancy This is my deep understanding of how the principles, practices of being an accountant. Okay, it could be the same thing. I'm undergraduate in chemistry. Do I have not only a knowledge of the different branches of chemistry, but when the one I select to pursue, do I know the proper techniques, the ways to do my bench work, how to do experiments? If I happen to be a field chemist, so how do I work and collect samples out in the field from lakes and streams and monitor pollution or whatever it was, and then come back and do the right tests and the right statistical analysis, and then can I present the information? That is deep mastery in your major. Also requires deep knowledge of a system. And this is the hard part, because we usually don't, you and I think in systems because we're pretty intellectual, and that's what PhDs do. But to have a bachelor's student do it, that's a different story. Let's simplify this, because I can sit here the rest of the day and we can argue about what a system is. But let's look what IBM talks about a system. And IBM creates these systems around where their challenges are. And they think there's 13 systems that you and I deal with every day. They're part of our lives. So they talk about systems of flow, food and agriculture, water, energy, transportation, and this is where they put the cloud. IT used to never be up here, but now it's in the cloud. So it is a flow. And then you have systems of human interaction, which involve construction, retail, entertainment, finance, education, health. And then you have systems of government. Depending on where you're at in the world, you have different levels. But in the U.S., we have three: the federal level, the state level, and the very local level, that have very different responsibilities. So when they presented with a challenge, they look at it very, very different. So what IBM and others have found is that we need our young people that are coming into the company not only to be deep in knowledge, but to know how to work a system. Now, at Michigan State University, we're big. We are huge. And we talk, every one of those systems is represented somewhere at the university. But only one of those systems is integrated and talks and presents themselves as a system, and that's our College of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Our health system curriculum, which involves 3 medical schools, a nursing college, and several others, don't talk to each other. They're spread all over campus, in the social sciences, everywhere. Our health administration people, they don't even talk to each other. They don't even present themselves as a system. And we can go through a number. The other one that's probably pretty good at talking about a system is at College of Education. As long as you talk about secondary education, our K-12 system, secondary, and that's completely separated from higher education. Those two groups don't talk to each other, so they really don't understand the system. Okay, the system is important because it takes longer to learn a system than it does to gain mastery in your major. Okay, so we have the bottom part. Now we get to the top part. And the top part is the T. We have to be able to talk to other disciplines. If you're going to work in a system, you're going to meet people from other disciplines. So when I started out, my first job after I graduated, I was in Thailand, and I was leading agricultural land reform, but I worked on a team that was made up of a water specialist from Sweden, a salt-tolerant crop specialist from Israel, and a labor economist, where I learned my labor economics, from Germany. And we had to work as a team. Even though I was the only one that was in the government office at the time, I had to lead this team. We had to talk to each other. I had to be aware of the disciplines. I had to learn really quickly how to talk to these people. Well, most students today don't know how to talk to somebody from another major. So if I'm going to be an economist and I want to be in the health systems, how do I talk to the biologists or the health scientists or those people when you've never had a class with them, you've never talked to them, and you don't know what they're all about? Then later on, not in the very beginning, you begin to learn other systems. And when other systems overlap, you find niches, and that's where the growth of all those entrepreneurial activities and things are going to take place. Then at the very top are some really key, these are the breadth skills. These are the teams that allow the skills and competencies allow you to cross functional boundaries, organizational boundaries, cultural boundaries, and they involve all kinds of skills that we take for granted often. Teamwork, cross-cultural competencies, project management, and a number of those kind of skills. These are the things, the components that make up the T. We do them almost every day in some form, I bet you, right here at the University of South Pacific. But we're not intentional about it, so we don't shape it as a T experience. Okay. Here's how, one way to reorganize how we do, what we do, to respond to a T. Now, this is something that's proposed by IBM, so I use this as one way, but there's variations. There are countries that are doing this. Finland has organized all its higher education in this way and consolidated its 3 major universities into one. Other schools in Singapore, South Korea, and others are doing this. This is not caught on in the U.S., but on campuses we are beginning to do it. Michigan State is really pushing. You hear in the literature a lot about silos, and this is an attempt to break down the silos. So what you do is you organize your, instead of silos that are separate from each other, you organize your faculty in a circle around. When you put the systems in the middle. Now, if you don't have all the systems, you put in the middle where your comparative advantages are. So is it agriculture, tourism, whatever, okay? And what happens is each of the disciplines, the faculty disciplines, have to be represented in each of the systems. So that when a student enters, they pick a system to go into, and they can see the interaction between disciplines, and then they pick their disciplinary where they want to be home. Okay? It's easier to change your discipline than it is to change your system. And the systems, because they're external and they're what we live in every day, there's immediate connection between the system and the outside. You have to bring the outside into the classroom to make it work, okay? And you have to then change the way we deliver systems. Okay. Now, the foundation and the most important thing that you and I have to do is the foundation piece of the T, and that's the me. And the me is the core aspect. What holds the T together, and what, and as far as Herbert Simon's concerned, it's the glue for everything. So we've looked at the T. Oh, this kind of slides over in this slide. Okay. We've looked at the T as, and the me as made up of 3 important things: confidence, awareness, and purpose. And if we can drive purpose, then we're going to be able to stimulate and excite students to learn and engage the university. Okay? So these are the 3 principles. And what we're doing is building an entire freshman platform, first-year student platform, from every angle of the university based on this. So my counterpart that heads up academic success and I end up professional success are operating on this same model, because the literatures that underline academic success and professional career development success are exactly the same, believe it or not. Okay. So purpose is the process of what you aspire to and what you want to do. It's why you want to, in some ways it can be what you want to make a difference in the world. That sometimes is pretty ominous for most 18, 19, 20-year-olds. But we try to get them to figure out what they're interested in and why they value what they're getting an education for, more than just a job, which is basically why most of their parents want them to get a college education. Okay, so next to purpose then is awareness. Not only do I know where the resources are that I need to go to get, but how do I fit in this world I want to go to? Who are the others that are playing in this world? How do I relate to them? How do I gain the inputs from them to understand that where I want to go better? So it's my general awareness, what's expected of me. Do I understand that where I want to go, I'll be able to develop the skills and competencies that are expected of me. What are the work attitudes and behaviors that employers expect of me? And how are we going to help facilitate students to do that? Then the other thing is confidence, the ability to try things and experiment and deal with failure. There's nothing worse for a student as the word failure. All of a sudden in the U.S., they've gone to 12 years of K-12 and another 4 to 5 years of school, 17 years of school where you can never fail. And the first thing that happens to them in the real world is they fail and they don't know what to do. So we're trying to build experimentation. Now, I talk to my employer friends and say, don't talk about failure in our world. That's not going to work. But talk about experiments, because you and I experiment and run experiments every day, and they don't all work. I've had many research projects that crashed and burned. And we get up and we try again. We figure out what the wording went wrong or the scale didn't make any difference. We recheck. We go out and we do it again. But we don't let students do that. Either they pass or fail. They don't get any of this experience to deal with failure very well. Okay, so that brings us back to this model. And it's not the big, in this Venn diagram, it's the intersections of these where you really want to do your work. And so, example, the intersection between purpose and confidence is, do I understand differences? Do I able to mobilize resources, and can I work as a team? So we want to put students in situations where they have a team environment. They have to go out and find the resources they need to be successful, and they have to work with others that are different from them, culturally different from them, which is can be kind of hard in the Midwest United States, or different disciplines. So senior projects now are looking at not just sitting there in English or chemistry or engineering. It's putting together senior projects involve multiple students from multiple disciplines on the same project and how well they interact with other kinds of students. Okay, confidence and awareness, learning from others, being able to adapt differences and being able to work with others. Very hard for our honor students to give up and try to even sit with and work with somebody else because they're so worried that that other person won't be as smart as they are and they'll get a bad grade. That's not going to happen in the workplace. That's not the dynamics at all. But our honor students have some of the worst skill sets leaving the university because they've always done it themselves. They don't trust anybody else to do it. And so they want to do it all, and they want to control the work team to their satisfaction. Those are not dynamics that work well in the workplace. Okay? So you get the general idea. So, that team model that I gave out, you're not going to sell students on depth and mastery and major, and you have to learn a system, and you have transdisciplinary knowledge, and you have to learn all those boundaries. That just goes right over their heads, out the door, and what in the heck you're taught? What are you stupid academics and all your scholarly language talking about? So we have to make the T really vibrant for them, so we've rearranged it. You have to have a purpose. It has to depend on your depth of knowledge and where I want to make a difference. So, what knowledge do I need? That's the depth. And where do you want to do your work? So it might be perfectly fine to have people in accountancy, and accountants want to be depth and knowledge accountants, but where do you want to work? Because it's a lot different to work as an accountant in health systems than it is to work in the finance sector. Believe me, it is. And to not have any of that understanding before you go in makes a problem. The red T, part of the T now, and those becomes awareness of what others are doing and how they interact with you. What are the expectations? And then the top part becomes the confidence part. You can't build boundary spanning skills unless you're allowed to cross boundaries. And what does it mean to cross boundaries? And put students in situations where they do that. So then our model just becomes, whoops, I'll back up a minute. Our model just becomes confidence, awareness, and purpose. And we've taken this to students, and students get it. We talk about the T this way, and then we add in the skills and competencies that they're going to need and how to set expectations. And we seem to be making a small movement of 50-some thousand students, just a little bit. But that's better than we've ever done. So other things that we're doing. Okay, this goes back to the first slide. We did this workshop around the T on how we're going to use our space and technologies to advance learning around the T and become T educators. The first thing you have to do is go into your classroom and realize those rooms have no walls. Now you got it nice because a lot of your walls just disappear. All your windows open up. Nothing happened in my place. But what I really did when I gave the address to that conference, I said the first thing in the T is you have to enter rooms with no walls. That's not my saying. That happened to come from a friend of mine who's senior vice president of Liberty Mutual Insurance Company. They're not a cool company. Insurance is not cool. But they're big, and if they don't, so they have to find out a ways to make what they do cool, because the four walls of the building doesn't sell anything. So the walls doesn't. So if you have time, I'm going to suggest another video that I could have put in here, again, with some of the same players. This one is Microsoft and Steelcase. So if you go under YouTube and you Google Microsoft and Steelcase, get their most recent video on the space and technology. It is totally awesome. You'll identify with it quickly because it has a very South Pacific theme to it. It starts with in a marine biology experiment. You don't know what in the hell is going on. They're just dropping these things out in the ocean, and they're going down and doing all kinds of experiments. And then they jump to a K-12 class, elementary school classroom, and they jump back to somebody on a tea plantation. The thing is, they're all connected. Everybody's working in a different context on the same, or being educated about the same issue. You don't figure it out to the very end. But they show you all over the world, and it turns out to be a pharmaceutical company sitting in somewhere, kind of futuristic, and all these people come to play. There are no rooms. It's all movable technologies and all these things, and they're already in play. They're here. So if you think that you can teach with, and you have to have a room, it's not happening. But at Michigan State, what we're doing is breaking down the walls. So you reach out as you're teaching, and you bring the outside world in. You bring on through many technologies alumni into space or employers into space, so you actually see what's going on. And at the same time, you can visually take students out, not physically out. You can take them out using technologies that are implanted in systems out there and actually monitor what's going on. I have taught many team classes as an economist. So here's how it usually goes, right? We're going to team a team class. So somebody from environmental science and I are going to teach an environmental science economics class. So my colleague writes we have 15-week semesters, so he writes the first 7 weeks, and then he hands it over to me, and I get the next 7 weeks, and there's a final, right? We're not in the classroom at the same time. He teaches his thing, and I come in and teach in mine. Not going to happen. We're going to teach at the same time in the same classroom, and the classroom technology will say, here's the issue we're solving, and the biologist will have it, here's what we're doing, and I'll be talking with the students and in the same environment of here's how the economists are, here's where we have challenges, how do we solve this? Based on the knowledge that you have from biology and the environmental sciences and my economics, how do we as a team solve this? And we're teaching at the same together mutually, not my 7 weeks and Richard's 7 weeks. Doesn't happen that way. We're doing that. We're trying to do much more transdisciplinary. We've taken all our core introductory what we used to call general education, and they are all transdisciplinary based on purpose, confidence, and awareness. So our basic writing class is all about confidence. So they write and they do critical thinking and problem solving around confidence and purpose. All the interdisciplinary point where we have to take classes in the social sciences, the sciences, and the humanities now are structured to be transdisciplinary. Now, the good thing in the U.S. In most areas in research is we cannot get grants now anymore unless they're interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary. You're probably well aware of that. So not only are we breaking down silos this way, but the research environment is breaking them down in other ways. So faculty are having a hard time here because they're used to their silos, and now we're asking them to respect the structures of the university, but transcend structure, transcend boundaries, and move across boundaries. As we did that video, and I was making my talk in that video that you saw, faculty were saying now and stood up and said, well, this changes the way we teach. Yes. This teaches how we deliver This is how we can everything. And they said, this is not an evolutionary process. This is a revolution. And it's in somewheres in our university, it's moving very quickly. And in other places, there's a lot of resistance. Okay? And it's a challenge every day of how far we're going to go. But we are being challenged from every side to change, or somebody else is going to do it for us. There's too many options out there to stay in place, unfortunately. So we have to figure out where we fit best and how we're going to move the model. Okay, at this point, I'm going to say that, this is a nice big T. It's healthy, it's vibrant. That's not what we do. There is no way that we produce people like that. In fact, we produce all kinds of little T's, all shapes and sizes and difference, all kinds of little T's. That's what undergraduate education does. They have to be nurtured and developed so that they can go out on there and realize that they have to continue to develop to get to that big T. Which brings us to this. In the U.S., the pipeline between undergraduate education and work is broken. We're relying on methods from the 1960s. Unless we're going to be successful with this, employers have to collaborate. It is a partnership. They can no longer sit out there and put out white papers with CEOs saying, you guys are doing it wrong because I need students that can do, people that can do this, this, and this. Show me, because most companies say it, but they can't prove it. I'm dealing with that. Even if it's true, we can't do it alone. They have to help. They have to build consistent recruiting methods that respond to this. They have to build relationships that nurture and offer opportunities to young people to develop those skills. We cannot provide environments that do it all. We have to be willing to open up and form those partnerships. But there is a lot of ownership on this on the employer side. This is not about telling us what we should teach. That comes in different ways. This is not about changing our curriculum. This is about leveraging our young people to be better talent through partnerships to get them the experiences they need. Now, I didn't bring up internships and co-ops. Richard and I have been involved in this. We know it's one way that can build this. It doesn't work for everybody, but we have to have ways that employers will collaborate. The T-Summits out of Michigan State University with IBM is an attempt to build and develop a base to leverage partnerships. And we're trying this, and some companies are responsive, others talk it, but then they don't follow up with it. Okay, so what is happening, though, in my part of the world is that recruiting is changing significantly. How companies identify the talent that they want. One is they're shifting from just a sole reliance on mastery. They're already assuming that you as faculty already do a good job at teaching them the nuts and bolts of whatever major they're in. What they're looking for is fit. How well these people have the broader, those transdisciplinary, those broadening skills, do they have them? And, you can produce all the superstars you want academically in your majors, and they're not going to get a job unless they can fit with those skills that are coming across the top. So, I'm going to show you an example of how they're going to do that in a minute. But there's some other things that they want. They're dating earlier. Now, this model gets a lot of chuckles in the U.S. Because we talk about this. But employers in our networks are not waiting for just to talk to seniors anymore. They're getting ready to graduate. They're working with first-year students and second-year students, building talent pools and getting them actively involved in their companies. Now, it doesn't start out with internships and college. It could be job shadows. It could be linking up with an alumni as a mentor. Now, here's how fast technologies have gone on this. We just started school, our academic year just started a week and a half ago. I didn't meet any of the freshmen until they walked on campus on August 28th. I knew nothing about them. I have no profile of where they are in career readiness. I have nothing. Academic side has their high school record. They know what the grades are. They know what their exams are. But I have nothing. But I have employers that come to me a week before and say, here's 40 freshmen that I want to meet, because we've been following them on Facebook. We sent our alumni back to their high schools and identified. They take them off Facebook. They know everybody that's going to Michigan State, and they say, we were interested in these 30 people. We want to have a breakfast next week with them so we can introduce ourselves. And I haven't even met them yet. A lot of employers know more about my incoming freshman class than I do. Okay, experience and failure. They like experience, they like failure. I have companies say, you know, give me the students that have failed, not grade-wise now, but have failed companies. If they've started, those entrepreneurs, they started and they tried and they failed, send them to me. I'm more interested in those than the kids that graduated with honors that didn't stretch themselves, get themselves out, and try things that are new and different. They may be highly brilliant, competent people, but if they haven't tried anything, they haven't gotten outside their comfort zone, I don't want to see them. So, let me show you, this is a website of a company called NAC. Now, the group behind this is out of MIT and Stanford. The gentleman that leads this team is an economist by the name of Brian Bjorgensen. I can never pronounce that name. He wrote The Race Against the Machine and the Second Machine Age. I'm going to talk about this at the very end. They are very worried about the replacement of many, many key jobs by technologies, and therefore the skill sets that employers are going to need. So he built a team of cognitive scientists, and this is all about fit. And we're seeing this in a mass movement. Fit's been around since the early 1980s when a colleague of mine at Michigan State developed the concept, but it's been with the massive ability to collect widespread data, use big data to develop algorithms that now we can do organizational fit. And we're seeing this over and over again. So what a fit is here, is I have to manipulate this. What NAC has done is develop what we call, they call NACs and then super NACs. And so if I can scroll down here, I think. Okay. So these are NACs, and they come in sets. Now you're going to see immediately where these come from. So they have a bunch of NACs, and these are things that are mindset. They have decision making, and you can go on down, and social and emotional intelligence, character and leadership, thinking. And this can come from many different sources. And then what they do is they consolidate them. You can just hold it right there. Yeah, put it on just right there. So those NACs combine to form super NACs. So these are the kind of things that employers look for. Okay? These are the things that employers look for. So what an employer does is they put together a campaign. This is an old static website, but they have these super NACs. So if you look up here, you see accounting. So what IAM as a company does is I want a campaign to hire an accountant. Then I pick the NACs and the super NACs that I think are most important to be successful as an accountant. What was my organizational fit for an accountant? And then what happens is, I can't put that webpage up, but by the ones they select, then this is a gaming platform. So the talent base that they're looking at goes out, and they, as a pre-selection device, they play these games. They look like any computer games that your kids are playing right now. Super Mario and all those kind of things. But they get at all these. So based on what you want, you could pick up to the games, and it will take, the maximum is 3 games, and it takes about 30 minutes. So as a company, I put together this NAC profile of what my position is going to be, and I give it a score. And now I go out and rate my talent pool. So I come to University of South Pacific Accountancy Department, and I identify 20 students that I'm interested in hiring. I give them this NAC, this assessment, and then I pick the ones that come closest to representing what my fit to my organization. If nobody fits my organization, I move on to another university somewhere else. And so what you do is you get NAC scores. I'm going to use this on campus. It's going quite quickly. I work with a group of really top-notch organizational behaviorists, and they all want to see the structure in this. They're getting kind of snooty. I'm telling them, look, I don't have a choice. 6 of our key employers are already using this. They're going to bring it to campus. They're going to require everybody they interview to take this before pre-interview. So they weren't even going to interview them until they take this. And 2 of them are our big accounting firms. Nobody escapes this. And it's going very, very fast. It's very inexpensive to do a campaign with 5 NACs. You want 5 NACs in it. Takes 3 games. It may cost something like $7 US and 50 cents per person to take the test. So if they put $100 in, 100 people in, what? That's $750. To come to a career fair at Michigan State just to rent the space is probably $1,000. To take everybody out of the workplace to come to a traditional career fair, you add up the dollars, they're saving big bucks doing this. Because what they do is they get the 2 or 3 people they want to talk to, and that's all they work with. Because that's all they need. So the outside is changing faster than the academy is changing to respond to how these students have to transition. Okay, can we go back? Okay. So, let me just conclude then with these thoughts. We're always going to have economic disruption in the business cycle, and we're going to go into another one. We haven't even gotten our breath and back on solid footing from 2008. It looks like in some places we may be hit again because of the slowdown in China. But in the U.S., the labor market's going to stay pretty strong because companies just haven't hired. But what I want to talk to you about is the fact that every one of our graduates from today on forward, and even you and your kids and your grandkids, their lives are going to be faced constant disruption. We have to make them adaptive innovators. We have to make them as we can because they're going to face constant change. What I mean by that is their jobs are going to disappear and new jobs are going to create. And if you're not nimble enough to move from where you are now into another job, you're dead. Okay, so let me talk about this. This will make all the stat people in here just really giddy and those that don't like stat. But I'm going to abuse statistics here to emphasize what I'm talking about. So the normal distribution curve, we love it. And we love the mean because everything around the mean is the same. That little green box is around the mean. It isn't even one standard deviation. You go out one standard deviation. Everything's about the same. We like it as homogeneous. Now, when I study stuff, I like things to be as far from the mean as possible in standard deviation because that's the weird stuff, and I study weird. So, I mean, that's really good. But most of us like the mean. Okay, so here's what happens. The mean means it's all the same regardless of where you go. So an engineering a student that's coming out of engineering that's been trained to the mean, a common core, I can teach in the U.S., I can teach in China, I can teach in India, I can teach at the University of the South Pacific. And if I am going to have an engineer that just needs those skills, I'm going to go to the place that produces the one at the cheapest cost to me. So I'm going to move those jobs. Or the other thing that happens is technologies can replace things that are repetitious and the same. So if the knowledge in that core is the same and it's over and over, we're going to change. We'll convert it to artificial intelligence, cognitive technologies, robotics. So we're sitting here today in the U.S., and I'm sure here, trying to understand where 40% of all our law jobs went to. We've eliminated them. And yet our law schools are full because they have to keep the old machine running. What are they going to do with the graduates? They aren't getting jobs, and they have a high debt level. Our law school graduates have the highest default on loans in their lawyers. Okay, go figure. But what happened was a highly sophisticated, interactive discovery software came in, that cost companies about $500,000 if they wanted it. Nobody could buy it. So we kept hiring lawyers because that's what entry-level lawyers do. What happened when they dropped the price under $2,000 for it, we eliminated all those jobs. Boy, that 2,000 piece of software was a lot cheaper than $150,000 lawyers. 14 of them out the door. That's, boy, for a partner, that's a lot of money. And we just lost them. They aren't coming back. So we teach to the core because it's easier. When Bill Gates comes down from the mountain and says, I don't have the people I need, there's a skill gap, that's not what he's talking about. We have highly skilled people in that green area. What he's talking about is I need people that can work 2 to 3 standard deviations away from that. They're doing the weird stuff. They're out there. They're willing to invest and move out there. And very few of our students are. So he says, I have a skill gap. You're not training the right people. No, we're not. We got them captured in the core. So we got a dilemma here because the core is going away. So this brings us back to the disruptions and why we need the T so bad. Cognitive technologies, AI, is going to change everything we do. Now, many of you may have heard the story of the game of chess. Have you heard the story of the game of chess? So the game of chess was developed in Iran, in Persia back in those days, by and I can't pronounce his name, but he developed the game of chess to entertain the king. And he took it to the king, and the king really loved the game of chess so much that he wanted to reward this guy. So this guy was really smart, and he says, just give me 1 grain of rice and double it every time for every square on the chessboard. So, what happens here is that nothing looks bad if you've got a chessboard and the side that's facing me. I go along until I get halfway through the chessboard. And then you begin to understand what the implications are there. By the time you get to half, he got to the chessboard, it would take all the rice that was grown at Persia at the time to satisfy it. If he gets on the other side of the chessboard, by the time they get to it, it would be all the rice produced in the world. The king was a little smarter than that, so he beheaded the guy. We don't have any choice about this. This is Moore's Law. Okay? Everybody knows Moore's Law, right? On technology change in the chip, and that it's exponential. Where are we in Moore's Law? Does everybody know what an exponential curve looks like? It goes along like this, and then it goes up like that. Okay, where are we on Moore's Law? Where are we on that curve? What? No, we aren't. Probably another 25 years. But what we're going to do is we're going to develop a neurochip. We've already developed it. It's going to replace it. But we've got a couple more years of Moore's Law. But we're getting pretty close. Probably 25 years. But if you're doing it every 18 to 24 months, you've still got 2.5 more changes in there, okay? So it really depends on what happens, where you are on the exponential curve, okay? And then what kind of technologies we put in place. And they've already figured this out. IBM's one of them, so they're gonna keep right on going. But we're at the curve. We're at 2005, we're at the curve. That means the next 2 changes, even if we have 2 left, are going to be we're on the other side of the chessboard. They're going to go so fast, it's going to die. And they're out there, they're ready. These technologies are there. So, it's pervasive and it's now. I'm getting 5 minutes. You heard my sign? Okay. She's got my time. Okay, I'm really good. I'm on the last slide, Richard. Okay. So, IBM's approach to all this, and they have a book out about this, is that everything will reach equilibrium. Okay, these new technologies are coming, folks, and they're here, and they understand that. And they're going to destroy jobs over here, and they're going to create all these wonderful jobs over here. And economists love equilibrium. We'll talk equilibrium to death, but the problem is what we don't talk about is how long does it take to reach equilibrium? How fast do you destroy the jobs over here, and how fast do you create them over here? And how do you get everybody that was lost a job over here, over here? We don't do that very well. This is not a win-win situation. Brian Bjorgeson and the people at MIT and their UK team talk about the 50-50 proposition. They say that in the next decade, we're going to lose 50% of all jobs that we currently know today. And it's not just college jobs and high professional jobs. It's basic. I mean, it's all up and down the labor force. We don't see one job in an American warehouse now that has a human being in it. It's all drones and robotic technologies. We will soon see pharmacists replaced by robotics. Okay? So they say we have to be prepared. There's another group that out there says if we don't control who owns these cognitive technologies and how the wealth from these are distributed, most of us will be unemployed. What kind of jobs that you and I right here every day will feel the hurt the most? Number one on the list is accounting. Number two on the list is financial analysts. Number three is research scientists. Now, I'm at IBM, and the facilities I work at are in Almaden, California, which is in Silicon Valley. They are there to do the neurochip, which is a new replacement of chip technology that will be based on the human brain so it doesn't overheat and so they can overcome Moore's Law, or they can continue Moore's Law. They also have robotics, and they also, if you really want to do this, if you're a Star Trek fan and you want to catch up with Spock, they are also doing teletransporting, and they can actually do it. Of course, it's atoms, not you, and it doesn't know if you will be the same when you get on the other side, but they are working on it. But in their neurochip lab, they took me down there to see what they were doing, and it was a dark room, and I walked in, and I was walked in with the head of the unit, my good friend who's the head of artificial intelligence, and he's the one and I work on the T together. I walk in this room, and it's just a lab. I don't see it. Then all of a sudden I hear this voice, and it says, Dr. Sporer, and I don't remember the other guy's name. How are you today? You haven't been in the lab for a while. How are things going? How are the kids? How this thing? You know, it was a robot. He looked like a human, but he's sitting there as a robot. I see that there's somebody here I don't know. Can you please introduce me? And so they introduced me as Dr. Phil Gardner from Michigan State University, director of the Collegiate Employment Research Institute, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he's working here with us on the T, et cetera. And this robot's very nice. He introduces himself, hopes you have a nice day, and everything else. So I leave. The next day I come back to work. They said, oh, let's go down to the lab. Okay, so we go down to the lab, and I walk in, and I know the robot's there. I say, how you doing? Oh, Dr. Gardner, you're back. Have I got news for you? Last night I went out and read everything you've ever written. And you know what? Here's some suggestions on what your research could do, and here's some different kinds of analysis you can do on what you've already analyzed. And by the way, here's some literature I suggest that you read. And he says, you know, right now they can say, and I can do it for you. Okay, I'm not kidding you. The robotics in a science lab where you've got autoclaving and over and repetition, robots can do it. You don't need postdocs, you don't need thousands, you need just a core group of scientists. And they can sit there, and these robots and this intelligence will redo experiments 24/7. So I'm thinking of the days when I was working with plant scientists and stuff on iron intake of pollutants, and they'd have to take down the lab, and they'd have to put in the next one okay, I got 5 minutes left. The next one, and it would go, and they'd have to take a lot of time. The robots can do it all, and then they can analyze the data, and because science research is very formulaic on the way you report, they can write the basic report. What's left for these genius PhDs to do but drink coffee and watch the machines? But it eliminates a lot of people. What are we going to do with them? Where are the opportunities? How are we going to adapt and adjust? This is what we have to prepare people for. It's not just our ability to be really brilliant and to transfer our knowledge of our content. That's so critical. But how are we going to extend this and go beyond this? Students need to be prepared. We need to be prepared. We need to be adaptable innovators. For us, it's around the T. For you, it may be some other kind of metaphorical content that brings you together and intentionally pulls together your curriculum and your pedagogy with the experiences outside the university to make it into one fabric. That's where we're going, and that's the challenge before us. You get to choose the ways you go, but I tell you what, you got to make a choice. You can't stand still, because outside is going so fast, somebody else is going to do it for you. And you may not like what you get. With that, I'll take questions, or do we wait till questions till later? Or I set myself up for, you can answer all the ones I can't answer, right?
Stay where you are. Thanks very much, Phil, for a really entertaining talk. And just when I think about those robotics, I think of some senior management positions that might well be replaced under that. And sure, a number of the audience would agree with me on that. You know,
only problem about
consistent decision making might be
senior administrators is they haven't made a robot that's empathetic. That would really take over senior administrators who are not empathetic.
Perhaps we won't go there.
Empathetic.
Thanks for a really interesting and I think really challenging and thought-provoking talk, and that's exactly the sort of thing we really like at this type of forum. I think we don't want to hear the same. We do want to get out of our comfort zones, and I think Phil's really very much challenged us in our thinking this area as well. We have time before the book celebrating the USP authors, so we'll take questions. So what we'll do, there's roving mic people around, isn't it? And so we'll just take questions. If you'd like to put your hand up, and then we'll get a mic to you, and then Phil will answer. But can you please just introduce yourself, and then we'll take from there. So we'll just take some questions.
They got a mic right there's the mic.
Dr. Gardner, my name is Dilawar Grewal. I'm the VP for Administration and one of the SMTs whose job can be taken up by robots. I have a question. Like you, I'm from a very rich background in the US, which is halfway irrelevant here. You talk about changing how students are prepared for the real world. You talk about how the industry is driving what they want out of a student. Yeah. You talk about curriculum being irrelevant to a certain point. Are universities becoming irrelevant? Half the professors you have are teaching something they learned 50 years ago.
I know.
Half the techniques they are using to teach are irrelevant to these generations. Half the things they are teaching will be irrelevant by the time these students graduate. Okay. So why have universities?
Okay, that's a good question. And I'm not sure I'm going to answer, but I really do think that universities have a very rich place to play, because it's the fundamentals of, most of us grew up in very liberal arts education where we got to experiment with disciplines. I was a chemistry major, but I was taking the history seminars, and I was the only science students that had ever taken the history seminar, but it enriched my language. We can provide the environment for that to happen. We have to be more intentional about it. And our faculty that is resistant to change is going to become irrelevant. I'm sorry to say that. But I think there's enough young faculty. I'm so enthused about the young faculty that are coming in that really want to do this. The problem is we've got to change the reward system first so that faculty are rewarded for doing this, not just their research. And we got to provide, invest in the technologies that we saw in the first one, or the one other video I alluded to provide the environment. Okay, so how are we going to do that, given us most of us don't have a lot of money and stuff? Okay, if we don't do it, yes, it's going to be supplied by a lot of other things, but they're not going to be able to provide the integrating experiences, the reflective practices that go into the me part to produce the kind of people they want. It's a lose game for them. They'll just train people to do something that are going to become obsolete. I mean, that's the alternative is, let's get them through on online courses. Let's get them through as things, and get them through quickly in 3 years. I mean, I'm dealing with this at one school, big school. They want a 3-year business program with no professional practice. It's just going to flood the market with cheap labor. They can't do very much. So we have the opportunity to be aggressive here if we want to, because I think we have the environment that can nurture these people. Because you got to start somewhere. You got to plant them in rich soil so they're confident when they leave here that they can withstand what's going to go on out there. If we just don't do anything, they're not going to withstand out there. So I think it's us. I really do. But I think we have a lot of soul searching to do to be how we're going to do this. And when you get in a university that's big as mine, that is very discipline driven, that is very research driven, it gets really, really hard. And it's going to be hard. But if we believe in what we do at higher ed is right, then we're going to have to change. If you believe what I do is important, then you can go do it somewhere else, and then higher education isn't important. But as a collective, I think we do think it's important. Now, I'm skating your question because I want to be able to safely get on the plane and get back home. So I won't stick my neck out too far. Well, I don't think, I know we won't go down that path. I will have to say, though, I'm sitting in I'm sitting in Fiji here in the restaurant this morning, and the waitress comes up and asks me where I'm from, and I said, the United States, and I'm from Michigan, and I'm at Michigan State. Oh, you're from the basketball team. See, even in Fiji, they know all about Michigan State and the Spartan basketball team. Now, I have to say that, though, I have to say you Buckeyes were pretty good the other night, too, so.
I have a question. Angela Jorkin, Dean of the Faculty of Science, Technology and Environment. We have been working really hard in trying to engage industries, to develop, to give students the experience and so on. But what I'm not sure what your experience is, but one of the most difficult things we are facing in these small island nations is the maturity of the industries themselves and the sizes, and hence while the need is there and they acknowledge it, there's this partnership that needs to be between the industries and academia, they're really, not quite able to come forward, come halfway to actually form this partnership, and for good reasons, obviously. But I was just wondering whether you might have any ideas or suggestions that we as an institution, as well as industries, can adapt to try and sort this thing out.
Okay, so we have talked about that. We spent the last couple of days talking about that. And actually, there's quite an analogy from, we have been so dependent on very large companies in Michigan that we had to switch to small companies, and we had no expertise to do that. And they're very hard to work with, even in the U.S. They're not visible in the normal ways that we see them. And then you add in that they're very new. They're small in Fiji. They're not really aligned, but they need those. My suggestion is to one of the things that we had to do was to develop a benchmark program. Just pick one or two employers that you have and work on both sides. That you skill them up, and as you build your curriculum, and then you hold that out as a model that then you can bring in other companies. You can't do this quickly. You're in a situation where you're going to have to take them company by company by company and get a tipping point that others see the advantage in this. So we've seen a lot of small employers. They don't know if they should invest in students. They don't know how to integrate them and try to give them the kind of experiences. They know where their gaps are because they know what they need, but they don't have to know how to talk to us. So we build some model example program with one or two companies based on what you're doing, and then you begin to use those companies to help you educate other companies and you build it. It's going to be much slower than the pace out there, but given your environment, it's probably the only way it's going to work. It's probably what you're trying anyway right now. And I'm just blessing what you're already doing.
I can just comment there, Phil, that's exactly what we did in New Zealand. And New Zealand, relative to the US, has a similar problem, size of scale. Most businesses in New Zealand are tiny by international standards, and that's exactly what we did with our similar program, was to start with some, and you get some advocates for what you do. Any questions?
Well, how about all this exciting people on this side of the audience that have No questions. You don't have no questions. Absolutely none. You're ready for the test, right?
The microphone.
Up there in the back. I think there is somebody's going to be bold on this side. Do you need... We have another mic? I got... She's coming. She's coming. Everybody wants to hear you.
We might have to make this the last question because we're going to move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I know tea time is really important here. U.S., we just keep right on going.
The robot would move us
breaks.
on from here.
Thank you very much. My name is Felix Parker. I'm a student of the university. My question is, comment is, I acknowledge that you believe in change, the entrepreneurship that you've highlighted, that we adopt in our students to have that kind of skills. And also for the, like universities to look at small businesses that, need to be business-minded. How do we develop that in the university if, say, we go in that path?
Okay. The challenge you threw out is exactly the same one I changed. My biggest challenge is to change the student mindset about why they're coming to the university, and they latch on that it's just you get into the curriculum that I want, do well in the curriculum, and just graduate. So that so we have to build from day one that there's a different set of expectations, both on being successful in the classroom and professionally successful. And that's what we're doing with that PCA model. So, we have a huge problem of students not being ready to transition out their senior year. So just like you said. And I think what we have to do is academic success and professional success are so intertwined now that they're from the day one that you come in, a student comes into the University of South Pacific, we're going to build on the same platform that you're going to be successful both in your academics and your and here's our expectations, and here's the things that you have to do. We have to be much more clear and intentional. Now, I'm not quite sure if I got what you wanted, but I think this is not going to be done unless students understand their role in it. This is not just something we lay down on top of them to deal with change that we have to incorporate them. They're really important. If you looked at the video, they had some minutes where there was a number of students in that summit. They're the ones that are really driving space and teaching changes at Michigan State because we involve them. So we need, you as a student needs to be involved in these discussions and these examples of how we're going to change, but also you understand you have to come in from day one and be engaged in both advancing academically learning, but how you connect it outside so you can develop those skills and competencies. Yeah. And if I didn't answer that, stop down and we'll chat afterwards.
Thanks, Phil. We better wrap it up there. Thanks. So I'd just like to sort of finish off by thanking Phil for a very interesting talk and for challenging our thinking, as I mentioned just before, that I think that's one of the key things we want in a keynote, and Phil will be around during the day and the forum, and so if you want to carry on discussions further at morning tea or lunch, whatever, we can do that as well. So could you please join me in thanking Phil for his talk? I now call on our library staff to come and do the next part of the presentation, which is a celebration of the USP authors.